Welcome back to Fairy Garden Discoveries, where STEM takes flight. Time doesn't always tick. Sometimes it stretches, drips, and shifts in ways only the patient can see. In the garden, Luma discovers that time leaves clues in shadows, in water drops, and in the quiet patterns of everyday life. This is the fairy who measured time without a clock. A story from the fairy archives about noticing, observing, and listening carefully over time. Let the story begin. Everyone said time moved quietly in the garden. So quietly, in fact, that most creatures barely noticed it at all. But Luma noticed. She noticed how the morning light crept slowly across the raised beds, warming one leaf before another. She noticed how dew vanished without anyone ever seeing it leave. She noticed how the birds always sang before the bees arrived, and how the bees always arrived before the sun stood straight overhead. Time, she thought, was doing something, even when it looked like nothing was happening. "I wish I could tell what time it is," Luma murmured, hovering low above the path stones. Not with bells or ticking gears, just by watching. From the shade of a clover patch, Sprig the beetle rolled onto his back and stretched his legs. "I can tell time," he announced confidently. "It's morning until I'm hungry, and then it's afternoon until I'm hungry again." "That sounds imprecise," Luma said gently. Sprig shrugged. "It's worked so far?" Luma smiled, but her eyes drifted back to the garden. If time could be felt and seen and sensed, then surely it could be measured, even without a clock. Luma decided to begin with something simple: shadows. She placed a smooth pebble in a sunny patch near the sunflower bed and watched as its shadow stretched across the soil. With a twig, she drew a small line at the tip of the shadow, then sat back to wait. Time passed. The air warmed. A breeze stirred the leaves. Somewhere nearby, a bird called once and then went quiet. When Luma looked again, the shadow had moved. "It's different," she whispered, adding a second line beside the first. "Just a little, but it moved." Sprig crept closer, squinting hard at the ground. "I think it's escaping," he said. "Should we hold it down?" "No." Luma laughed softly. "The shadow isn't running away. The sun is moving." Sprig stared upward, then back at the ground. "So the shadow is following the sun?" "Yes." Sprig considered this. "That seems like a lot of effort for a shadow." Luma smiled and added another mark. Without making a sound, time had left its first clear trace. As the sun climbed higher, the garden brightened. The pebble's shadow grew shorter, tucking itself closer and closer to the stone. Luma returned often, careful to mark each new position. The lines formed a gentle curve across the soil, morning stretching toward midday. "When the shadow is shortest," Luma said, "that must be the middle of the day." Sprig stepped directly into the shadow and waved his antennae. "Am I in the middle now?" he asked. "Only of the shadow," Luma replied. Sprig frowned thoughtfully. "I don't feel different." "You won't," Luma said. "Time doesn't announce itself, it just keeps going." The sun shifted again. The shadow crept onward. By afternoon, it began to stretch long once more, reaching farther than before. Luma added her final mark and leaned back to study the pattern. Morning, midday, afternoon. Sprig followed the curve with one leg. "So time makes shapes," he said. "Yes," Luma replied, "and the shapes repeat." Sprig nodded slowly. "I like shapes. They feel organized." But the next day, clouds rolled in. The sun disappeared behind a soft gray veil, and the pebble's shadow faded until it was barely there at all. Luma frowned. "Well," she said, "that won't work today." Sprig brightened. "Excellent. Time has been canceled." "Not quite," Luma said. "We just need another way to notice it." Her eyes drifted upward to a vine hanging over the path. A drop of water gathered at its tip, trembling before falling to the ground below. Plink. Another drop followed. Plink. Luma slid a broad leaf beneath the vine and watched carefully. 1 drip, she counted. 2 drips. 3. Sprig crawled underneath and tilted his head back. "Is the sky leaking on purpose?" he asked. "The water is falling at a steady pace," Luma said. "That makes it useful." Sprig held very still. "I will not blink," he whispered. "I don't want to miss time." The leaf filled with drops, each one marking a moment, quiet, steady, and patient. Even without sunlight, time was still telling its story. The leaf filled slowly with water. Each drop landed with a soft sound, rippling the surface before disappearing into stillness. Luma watched closely, counting at first, then simply noticing the rhythm. The drops did not hurry, they did not pause, they fell when they were ready. "This feels like time," Luma said. "Not fast, not slow, just steady." Sprig crouched beside the leaf, leaning so close his antennae brushed the rim. "I think the water likes being dramatic," he whispered. "Every drop makes an entrance." Luma smiled and marked a small line on her stone for every 10 drips. When she returned later, the marks matched the ones from before. "The pattern stayed the same," she said, "even when we weren't watching." Sprig's eyes widened. "So time keeps going even if we take a snack break?" "Yes." Sprig looked unsettled. "That feels rude." Clouds shifted overhead. The dripping slowed, then stopped. Luma closed her notebook gently. "Time changed," she said, "because the conditions changed." Sprig nodded. "Ah," he said, "time is very responsive." When the rain passed, the garden woke all at once. Bees returned to the lavender. Leaves lifted their faces toward the sun. A warm breeze carried familiar scents across the beds. Luma noticed something else, too. Every morning, the bees arrived after the light brightened the stones. Every afternoon, they left when shadows stretched long again. "They come and go at nearly the same times," she said, sketching tiny wings in her notebook. Sprig followed a bee with his eyes. "Do you think they have tiny watches?" "No," Luma said. "They notice repeating signals. Light, warmth, flowers opening." Sprig nodded thoughtfully. "I notice signals too." "Like what?" "When my stomach says hello." Luma laughed and added another note. Repeating events help mark time. By watching what happened again and again, she could tell whether the day was beginning, stretching forward, or winding down. Time wasn't hidden. It was simply woven into the garden's habits, quiet, reliable, and always happening. At midday, the garden grew calm. The sun stood high. Shadows tucked themselves close to stones and stems. Even the bees seemed to pause, resting in the shade. "This is the middle," Luma said softly. Sprig lay flat on a warm rock, legs stretched wide. "I like the middle," he declared. "Nothing is rushing." Luma compared her notes from yesterday. The shadow marks were nearly identical. The bees had rested at the same time. Even the breeze felt familiar. "When things repeat," she said, "we can predict what comes next." Sprig rolled onto his side. "So time isn't a surprise?" "Not usually." Sprig considered this deeply. "I am frequently surprised." "That's because you don't record data," Luma teased. Sprig gasped. "You're right." I rely heavily on vibes. They watched as the sun slowly shifted, shadows stretching once more. Without a sound, midday gave way to afternoon, just as it always had. Time didn't announce itself. It simply continued, patient and precise. That afternoon, Luma laid her notebook open and studied the pages side by side. Shadow curves, drip marks, bee counts, notes from cloudy days and sunny ones. Together, they formed something new, a story written not in words, but in patterns. Time leaves clues, Luma said. You just have to collect enough of them. Sprig climbed carefully onto the edge of the notebook. So the garden remembers what happened before? In a way, Luma said. It responds based on what's already occurred. Sprig tapped a page with one foot. I thought things just happened. They happen for reasons, Luma said, and when we write them down, those reasons become clearer. Sprig nodded slowly. I think I understand. He paused. Does this mean I have always been this hungry at this time of day? Luma laughed. Yes, that's a very consistent pattern. Sprig smiled proudly. I am predictable. Around them, the garden hummed, repeating, responding, keeping time without ever needing a clock. One afternoon, Luma spread her notebook beneath the apple tree and studied the pages carefully. Yesterday, last week, today. The drawings looked similar at first glance, but not the same. Sunflowers had gained leaves, bean vines had climbed higher. Even the shadows she'd drawn grew longer or shorter depending on the season's light. The sunflower added 2 leaves, Luma said softly, and the beans grew faster after the rain. Sprig leaned in, eyes wide. I thought they just decided to grow, he said. They responded, Luma replied, to sunlight, to water, to warmth. She pointed to her weather notes. Warm days helped the flowers. Rain helped the soil. Cool mornings slowed the bees. Sprig scratched his head. So the garden reacts to what happens? Yes, Luma said. And when we write things down, we can see how. She turned another page. See? Fewer visitors on cloudy days. Sprig blinked. I never noticed that. That's okay, Luma said gently. Noticing over time takes practice. Around them, the leaves rustled softly. The garden wasn't just growing, it was responding. Later that day, Sprig stared at a familiar patch of clover. I am certain this was smaller yesterday, he said. Luma flipped back through her notebook. Let's check. She placed 2 drawings side by side, one from 3 days ago, one from today. Each clover leaf was just a bit broader, just a bit taller than before. It grew a little each day, she explained. Sprig gasped. So it didn't suddenly get bigger? No, Luma said. Small changes add up. She traced a line across the page, connecting each drawing. Data helps us see change clearly, even when it happens slowly. Sprig watched the line carefully. Is that why I feel different sometimes? He asked, even when I don't know why. Luma smiled warmly. Yes, that's a very good observation. Sprig sat up straighter. I observed myself. Luma laughed softly. The notebook didn't rush. It didn't forget. It simply waited, holding moments together until patterns appeared. As the week went on, Luma noticed something new. Sprig was changing too. One morning, he crawled farther without stopping. Another day, he reached a leaf he hadn't been able to climb before. Luma added a small note to her page. Pipkin, stronger. Sprig peeked at the notebook. What's that? He asked. It's an observation, Luma said carefully. Sprig looked down at himself. I didn't notice. That's because change can be quiet, Luma replied. She showed him earlier notes, shorter distances, longer rests, fewer climbs. Sprig's eyes widened. I've been improving. Over time, Luma said. Sprig smiled proudly. I like Data. Luma laughed. Data likes you too. The garden hummed around them, full of small, steady progress. Some changes were easy to see. Others needed patience and careful records to be understood. That evening, Mela and Sprig sat together as the sun dipped low. The garden looked peaceful, almost unchanged. But Luma knew better. She closed her notebook gently. The garden didn't suddenly become this way, she said. It became this way step by step. Sprig nodded slowly. I always thought remembering meant holding everything in my head. Luma shook her head. Remembering can also mean writing things down. Sprig smiled sheepishly. That feels easier. Luma looked around the garden. Flowers opening, insects resting, shadows stretching. Data helps us tell true stories about change, she said. Not just what we think happened, but what actually did. Sprig leaned back against a stone. I think, he said, the garden really does remember? Luma smiled. Yes, and now, so do we. Time didn't need a clock. It had patterns, patience, and a story, waiting to be noticed. As evening settled over the garden, the air grew still. Luma drifted slowly along the paths she had walked all week, noticing how familiar everything felt, and how different it truly was. The sunflowers leaned heavier with new blooms. The soil held the memory of rain. Tiny tracks crisscrossed the ground where visitors had come and gone, each one a quiet record of time passing. Sprig rested beside her, unusually quiet. It feels the same, he said slowly. But it isn't. Luma smiled. That's because we've been paying attention. She opened her notebook one last time and turned the pages carefully. The first drawings were small and uncertain. The later ones were clearer, steadier, more confident. Change doesn't rush, Luma said. It happens a little at a time. Sprig studied the notes, then looked back at the garden. I never remembered things this way before, he admitted. That's okay, Luma said gently. That's why we observe. Sprig nodded. It didn't change suddenly, he said. It grew. Luma nodded too. And we grew with it. As the moon rose, the garden settled into quiet shadows. Luma closed her notebook and rested it on her lap, her arms folded softly on top. The garden hummed faintly, alive with memory, even when nothing seemed to be happening. I used to think the garden just forgot things, Sprig said, but it remembers everything it's been through. Luma smiled. It remembers in patterns. She looked at the beds, the paths, the places where sun and shade met. When we collect data, she said, we're learning to listen carefully over time. Sprig thought for a long moment. So, remembering isn't about being perfect, he said. It's about paying attention. Yes, Luma replied, and writing things down so we can understand them later. Sprig grinned. I think I like remembering this way. Warmth settled in Luma's wings. The garden hadn't spoken out loud. It hadn't announced its changes, but it had told its story, slowly, quietly, and honestly. And now, Luma knew how to hear it.